until from the time that the months from the time of the festival starting to the time that they had brought this offering. So we see that in order to have the festival of first fruits, you have to have Aviv barley. Let's look at Deuteronomy 16:1. Guard the month of the Aviv and perform the Passover to Yehovah your Elohim, for in the month of the Aviv Yehovah your Elohim brought you out of Mitzrayim by night. Notice that I put the words the Aviv. It's not in English, but it is most definitely in the Hebrew every time it talks about the Aviv barley, or the month of the Aviv. It's not a month called by the name Aviv until much later. Again, we have an anachronism. The month of Aviv. Well, it wasn't called Aviv in Egypt when Israel left the land. It was called the month of the Aviv. Aviv is a state of development in the barley crop that allows for the first sheaf to be offered in the festival of first fruits, as we read earlier in Leviticus 23:14. And then we can read in Leviticus chapter 2 verse 14, and if you bring a grain offering of your first fruits to Yehovah, bring for the grain offering of your first fruits green heads of grain roasted on the fire, crushed heads of new grain. Now, the Aviv if we brought the Aviv, and that is a mistranslation there, green heads, because if we brought green heads of barley to the temple and offered them as a burnt sacrifice, there would be no grains to burn. It would go up in steam. We would be just burning the plant without the seed. So we see that these heads of grain have to reach a point in development when the new moon is sighted, that within 2 weeks, 3 at the most, because of the length of what day of the week the Feast of Unleavened Bread starts, could be, first fruits could be as much as 3 weeks after the first of the month. This grain has to be at a state where it can be brought either parched or ground as flour in the temple. If it's not quite totally, it's still a little bit soft in the chaff and the husk, then they could parch it if it was developed enough. And if it was totally developed, they could grind it and make cakes out of it and offer it there. Now, let us look at how we celebrate Pesach today. First of all, let's look at what is Pesach. Is it a day or is it an event? Some people are under the misconception that the whole day of the 14th is Pesach. That's not what the Torah says. Pesach is an event. It is the sacrificing of the lamb or kid as a what they did in the very first Pesach. They offered this lamb, spread the blood on the door of their homes, on the lintel and on the side post, and that protected them. The very word Pesach means to skip over, and we can see that Yehovah skipped over the houses where the blood was applied to the doorposts. In Exodus 12:11 we read, "And this is how you eat it, your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Passover." Talking about the lamb, they're eating the lamb. He says it is the Passover, or the Pesach of Yehovah. Exodus 12:27. Then you shall say, when your children ask you about this, then you shall say, It is the Passover or Pesach slaughtering of Yahweh, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Mitzrayim when he smote the Mitzrites and delivered our households, and the people bowed their heads and did obeisance. It is not the whole day or calendar date of the 14th. One group, even in Yehoshua's day, worked up until noon. Some of them did not work from sunrise on until till after the first day of unleavened bread was over. But Pesach is not the whole day in which this event took place. Is it a moed or a chag? A Sabbath? No, it is not a Sabbath. Because it's not a day but an event. Leviticus 23, 5 and 6. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, between the evenings, is the Passover to Yahweh. And on the 15th day of this month is a festival of unleavened bread to Yahweh. 7 days you eat unleavened bread. And then we read on that the first day of unleavened bread is a Sabbath, and the last day is a Sabbath. So we see that Passover is a memorial. It is a moed. It is not a feast day as a chag. And we see that there is a distinction in Leviticus 23 between the moed and the chag, the chagim. There are 7 moed, actually 8 counting the weekly Shabbat. But there are all of them are moeds, but not all of them are chagim. Some are days and some are just appointed times, such as the Pesach. Now let us look at a traditional Jewish and oftentimes Messianic Seder. The various parts of the Seder. We have one of the most fundamental parts of the Passover Seder within Judaism and the Messianic groups is the Haggadah, the book which tells the story of the Exodus and the story of Pesach. We also have the Seder plate. A traditional Jewish Seder plate has 7 little receptacles. Sometimes they're just a concave hole or a concave place in the plate, but there's 7 of them on that plate, and 6 of them hold emblems, and the one in the middle holds usually a bowl of salt water if it's there. We have the karpeth, which is the vegetable dipped in salt water, which symbolizes the tears of the slaves in Mitzrayim. We have the zeroah, which is the shank bone, and it's a reminder of the Pesach offering, Pesach sacrifice. We have the beitzah, which is the roasted egg, and this, we are told, is a reminder of temple sacrifices. We have the maror, which is the bitter herb, which reminds us of the bitterness of slavery. We have the chazareth, which is a vegetable dipped also in salt water to represent tears. We have the charoseth, which is a mixture of, the chazareth is not dipped in the salt water. It's used later and we'll talk about it to make a sandwich with the charoseth and a matzah. Excuse me. The charoseth, which is a mixture of fruit, nuts, cinnamon, and wine, usually a brownish color to represent the mortar made by Israel while in Egypt. And then we have on a separate plate the 3 pieces of matzah. Sometimes they are held in what's called a matzah tashin, I think is the term for it. It's been a while since I've used one, so I've forgotten. But it's a pocket with 3 chambers that each piece of matzah goes in a separate chamber. Some Messianics make a lot of significance about this in the Seder. Now, the order of the Seder, and this is going to take a little while because there's 39 different steps in a traditional Seder. We have first, and I'll try not to speak a lot about each one of them, but just to give an overview of them. The Kiddush. This is the first of the 4 cups of wine that are drank during the Seder. Can't have a Jewish festival without the Kiddush cup. We have the Archatz, which is the washing of the hands. Then we have the Karpath, which is the vegetable dipped in the salt water. We have the Yachatz, which is the breaking of the middle matzah. Sometimes at this time, the middle matzah, the part that one of the pieces that is broken, is placed in another napkin or something and it's hidden in the home or wherever the Seder is being held, and later the children are going to look for it and bring it back and redeem it. Something that Messianics make a big parallel to Yehoshua is being hidden in the earth. Then we have the Magid, which is the retelling of the Exodus story, which basically is the central purpose of the Passover Seder. After the Magid is recited, we have the second cup of wine, and it's poured but not drunk at this time yet, because we have to have a child or 4 children ask the what's called the Manishtana, the 4 questions. Why do we do this? At this point, some raise the second cup and cover the matzah, and then they answer the question with, "This is what our fathers instructed us." And then they set down the cup and uncover the matzah, and they recount the story of the plagues of Egypt. And as each plague is read, they would dip their finger in the cup and drip a drop of wine on a plate. But as the words blood, fire, and pillar of smoke are said, they would literally spill a bit of the wine from the cup, not dip it, their finger in it and dip it out, and they would put it on a chipped plate to symbolize the slavery and how their spirits were broken and things of this nature. And this one reason given for doing this is that we have to the plagues diminished from Egypt. They took things away from Egypt. Then the Dayenu is recited. The Dayenu means it is sufficient. A lengthy discourse where the leader of the Seder would make a comment, and then the rest of the people at the Seder would say Dayenu, or it is sufficient. We have then, according to the Chabad, we have a statement by Gamliel that it is commanded in the Torah to mention 3 things during the Seder, or it is not a valid Seder. These 3 things are the Pesach, or the lamb, the maror, the bitter herbs, and the matzah, the unleavened bread. Then the broken matzah is lifted, and recount the haste in which Israel left Egypt is recounted with the matzah. We replace the matzah and recover them, all 3 in order. Then the second cup is lifted, and we keep it lifted, and we say some blessings over the matzah, the maror, and the cup, and we keep the second cup lifted until the blessing of who has redeemed us is recited. Then the second cup is drunk, or we drink the second cup. My English grammar is not that great here. We drink the second cup while reclining, or today we would lean to the left and drink the matzah, or drink the cup.